I will now turn this webinar over to Toy for us to begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Toya Hemingway, and I am chapter chair here at SCORE Chicago. I want to thank BACP for inviting us to participate in this webinar. SCORE is a national nonprofit association dedicated to helping small businesses get off the ground, to grow, and to achieve their goals through education and mentorship. We have been serving the needs of business owners across the country since 1964. Here at SCORE Chicago, our mentors are experienced entrepreneurs, corporate managers, and executives with backgrounds in a diverse set of industries and specialties who volunteer their experience and knowledge to help small business professionals start, develop, and grow their businesses. We offer free and confidential mentoring on an ongoing basis, as well as low cost or no cost business training and free online workshops. In addition, we offer numerous templates and tools on our website. If you're interested in being mentored, please go to score.org and submit a mentoring request. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Nicholson. Jeff has over 33 years of commercial and investment banking experience. He was responsible for the client coverage activities of diversified companies in the central US. He has had the opportunity to observe and work with managers and owners across a wide range of industries, from large public multinationals to small privately held companies. During 17 of those years, he was a successful adjunct instructor at both undergraduate and graduate levels in both management and in finance. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Taya. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for participating in this webinar on how to transform your dream into a real startup. I very much appreciate you listening in. I'd like to start with this quote: "Entrepreneurship is like eating glass and staring into the abyss of death." Well, this quote was made by a guy that was once famous for borrowing money from his friends in order to pay rent. But he's also famous because he was a co-founder of PayPal, a co-founder of SpaceX and of Tesla. Yeah, we're talking about Elon Musk. Elon's a guy that went from famine to feast, and he knows this journey very, very well. And this is how he feels about it. We're here today to learn a little bit more about how to successfully start our own business. Now, we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to go an inch deep and a mile wide. So please fasten your seatbelts. Many of you are here today because you want to know if you have what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur. Well, in my mind, you're leaning in the right direction if you're very restless right now, if this is all you think about, if you are beyond determined, if you take criticism as motivation, if you aren't broke, and if you can cope well with stress. Because if you actually make it, it is a very exclusive club. It's estimated that only 6% of the adult population in the US owns a business as their main job. The downside of being exclusive is a potential disconnect with family and friends. Many aren't going to understand what you're going through. They're not going to be able to relate to the problems you face. The demands for your time will never seem to stop growing. There's always more you could be doing. There's always a project, an event, a meeting, a phone call that you could be making. Why? Because in the end, it's you, and it's only you. You are the one that's accountable. That's your job, after all. And most of your family and friends, they just won't get it. And here's another fact often not discussed. Of the roughly 33 million small businesses in America, Over 80% are one employee companies. And that percentage has been growing with more web-based businesses being launched every year. But being in a business all by yourself can be a very lonely proposition. So you can't let loneliness burn you out. So you need to make time for family and friends. You have to plan it on your calendar. I also suggest that you should find a hobby and especially find out when your chill time is, because you'll want to use it whenever you can. You need to build a network for yourself. You should find a mentor for sure. You could come to SCORE Chicago for that. But you should also look for other entrepreneurs to interact with. You should also consider a co-founder or a partner for your business. We'll get into that a little later. Consider using co-working spaces rather than your own home so you can get out and talk to people, interact and network with them. You can find networking groups to network with online. You could either join or even start a mastermind group online and use that as a sounding board for things that you'd like to sort out or struggle through. Remember, self-worth is not the same as net worth. Now take a look at this figure. This is no joke. This picture was drawn by an aspiring entrepreneur who wanted to help his family understand and get a sense of what he was going through. There will be emotional turbulence. And I'm talking about bouts of severe anxiety and stress, frankly, because you're going to have to juggle many roles, from salesperson to fulfillment manager to treasurer. You're going to face countless setbacks in the process. Now, founders rarely talk about it, but many fake it until they make it. They struggle silently, but that hiding makes matters worse. Now, this roller coaster, like you're seeing on this slide, will tempt you to neglect your health, to stop exercising, to not worry about getting enough sleep. Passion is a big driver for success, but it can also consume you if you're not careful, and you need to be careful. Well, that's a snapshot of what's ahead. You should know that you're in one of the better states for launching a startup. Actually, Illinois is in the top 5. And this was based on a study by Looka, which is a logo design and brand identity platform for entrepreneurs. And they did this survey a couple of years ago. And so the top 5 states, California, Texas, New Jersey, Illinois, and Georgia. And the 6 criteria that they used are listed on this slide. The number of companies with fewer than 5 employees. So is that ecosystem right for smaller companies? What's the survival rate for new businesses? What percentage of new businesses to the total are there? Is there or is there not an affordable cost of living? What's the payroll for smaller businesses and the median household income overall in that state? Well, California, really, it has the highest number of businesses with fewer than 5 employees of any state in the country. So that helps, and it has a great survival rate as well. That might be partly due to Silicon Valley, probably. Now, Texas is also decidedly a business-friendly state. And Austin, by the way, attracts legions of entrepreneurs, Austin, Texas. But Illinois certainly is more affordable than either coast. And the Chicago startup ecosystem is rather vibrant. And by the way, Chicago is the only Midwest state in the top 10 on this survey. So you've got a good environment. The question is, do you have what it takes to capitalize on this? What are the most important traits of a successful entrepreneur? Is it being organized? Confident? A self-starter? Being creative? Well, the conventional wisdom of most observers is that passion is the #1 characteristic for startup entrepreneurs. Well, the Founders Institute was begun in 2009 in Mountain View, California. And it's right now the world's largest boot camp for startups. They have launched over 4,000 businesses across 185 cities, including Chicago. Now, in order to get in, you have to take a pre-admissions test because they want to know whether or not you have what they believe a successful entrepreneur must have. And you have to pass the test to get in. And these are the 4 traits they're looking for. Emotional stability, high impulse control, allowing you to maintain calm under stress. Fluid intelligence is another one. That's the ability to quickly learn a new set of rules and apply it to solve a problem today. Openness is about creativity, curiosity, willingness to challenge norms and appreciate the things that are around you. And agreeableness measures cooperation versus being an antagonist, but overall, your willingness to collaborate with others. Now, the Founders Institute believes sincerely that they have a lock on the DNA of successful entrepreneurs. Now, surprisingly, while the Founders Institute was first launching businesses, a couple of venture capitalists and a McKinsey consultant tested over 500 successful entrepreneurs to see what made them tick. Now, what successful meant to them is that the entrepreneur either sold the company to someone or actually took it public, which is a pretty high bar if you think about it. But they looked at 500 successful entrepreneurs, and they identified 4 traits which existed in each entrepreneur in some way, shape, or form, where one tended to really be dominant, and then there was another that was secondary. And this is the framework that they used, if you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs temperament testing, was a very similar format that they employed for this. Now, heart dominant is about passion, about sacrifice, about an unshakable sense of purpose. That trait was dominant in 65% of those successful entrepreneurs. Now, smarts is about being rational, about being fact-driven, focusing on processes and setting goals and holding people accountable. That's smarts. Guts is about taking action with conviction. It's about being risk tolerant, not being a risk taker, but also being able to have fire in your belly to endure the long haul. This is a marathon and not a sprint, and that's guts. And luck. Now, luck is not about gambling. It's about, to these guys, it's about a positive attitude, about a curiosity to create your own luck, and an ability to take advantage of it when it drops in your lap. Now, luck was dominant in 25% of those successful entrepreneurs. Now, heart, smarts, guts, and luck, I think, well, first of all, it was a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. I really recommend you get the book. You could get it on Amazon. And I think it's really a great self-awareness tool. As you're reading through it, you can begin to think about yourself and the sentiments that you have about your business. Now, I think you can go to the internet and look at countless articles and read all sorts of things about successful traits of entrepreneurs. What you've just heard from me is my best summary of what I think brings it all together. Now, with that as background, let's just take a look at what you're facing here in terms of reality. The biggest reality of business ownership is if you take a look at the time between 2000, the 10 years between 2006 and 2015, on average, 33% of business startups failed in that first 2 years. Now, by the way, it's interesting, 36% of all small businesses do not have a website. That's a very similar percentage. I don't know if there's a direct correlation, but I think there is. But this is what it looks like in the first 2 years. Now, over the next 2 years, so after 4 years, another 13% of those startups fail. So after 4 years, 46% have vaporized. And then after 7 years, only about 2 out of every 5 startups survive. That's a 3 out of 5 failure rate. Now, keep in mind, these numbers are aggregates of all sorts of businesses across all sorts of industries throughout the United States. So, for example, franchises have a 75 to 80% success rate because you're buying into a business that has an established framework and they help you to get started and all that. So that's a very high success rate. Whereas restaurants, it's a different story. After 3 years, almost half, actually half or better of restaurants fail after 3 years. So that's embedded in these numbers as well. Take a look at this chart. Now, this is based on actual data of startups between 1994 and 2015. So on the far left side, you've got the percentage of businesses. So at the beginning in year one, if you look at the bottom axis, year one, go up to the top. So 100% of the businesses are there in year one. And then with each successive year, this graph is charting the percentages of businesses that still survive. But based on the actual data, it doesn't seem to matter whether the economy is in a growth spurt or a recession. The track record of successful startup companies has followed a surprisingly consistent pattern over the last 20 years. Now, the 2-year survival rate for startups after 2015, which isn't shown on this chart, averages 69% compared to 67% for the past 20 years. So while it's a little better, it's not meaningfully different. Listen, our mission and yours is to help you become one of the 2 out of 5 companies that survive after 7 years. If you make it that far, chances for the longer term survival are really great. So what do you think are the major causes of failures of startup businesses? Well, Inc. magazine went to its 500 founders, and that's the 500 fastest growing privately held companies in America, and asked them to think back to their very first year in business and identify what was their biggest mistake or their biggest challenge. And here's the result of that survey. The number 1 challenge or mistake was a shortage of capital. And note number 2, a bad fit with other key employees. That's a distant number 2. If you pay attention, which we do at SCORE, to some very noteworthy organizations that follow failures, this is a summary of some of the more prominent numbers. So Y Combinator, for example, is a startup accelerator out in California. It's really focused on mostly on high-tech businesses. So it's an accelerator. They provide some seed capital. So as an example, Y Combinator helped found Airbnb and DoorDash, for example. So what they say were the major contributors to failure was, number one, having no specific customers in mind. People were building businesses believing that someone, they didn't know who, would have to like what they're doing. Secondly, most founders of failed startups didn't quit their day jobs. Most founders of successful ones did. And few major, I underline major startups are founded by just one person. There's usually 2 or 3 people that are in partnership to launch this major business. And lastly, most successful startups end up doing something different than what they originally intended. Now, that's what you can learn from Y Combinator if you go through all their data. Now, Entrepreneur Magazine regularly publishes information on failures, and this is their top list, if you ask me. Number 1 is failing to research the business idea to see if it's viable. You know, some founders are so just driven to launch their business so badly that they don't do the work that they need to ahead of time. And that includes focusing too much on the sales of the company or the size rather than on profitability. So underestimating financial requirements and timing is another big problem. It also includes making cost projections that are too low. Now, another prominent failure is working only in the business rather than on the business. And this is all about fighting fires, particularly if you're a one-employee business. And if you've launched an online business, it's particularly true. You're fighting fires every day just to get through the day. You've got a problem with fulfillment. You've got a marketing issue, something on the social platform, an order's of trouble. You got a complaint, and you're fighting fires every day. That's what's working in the business. But if you're not working on it, it's hard to get it into that sustainability position. And working on it means thinking about your supplier relationships, trying to understand what competitors are trying to do in your territory, looking at your marketing mix and trying to determine if there's something differently you should be doing with social media. Those are the things that are working on the business. But fighting fires doesn't allow you to get there, and that's a big cause of failure. And the last one is miscalculating market size, timing for getting in the market, how easy it is to get started, and what the potential market share of your business might be. Success is the ability to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. Now, this quote was made, by the way, by Winston Churchill, who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 1945. And you know that there was a big World War II figure. But his history is very interesting. For many years, his career in public service was peppered with lost elections or joining political parties that wound up being on the wrong side of the election, losing out. Indeed, from 1929 to 1939, a lot of people called them his wilderness years. He didn't know what he was doing. So he knows about enthusiasm in the face of failure. Now, the point of all this isn't to scare you, believe me. It's to help you avoid stepping on landmines. We want to help you navigate through the choppy waters better and increase your chances of being successful, of being the 2 out of 5 businesses that succeed. In my mind, startup failure is about not making something or not providing a service that enough people want or need. Period. Paul Graham, who was the co-founder of Y Combinator we talked about before, he said this: the very best startup ideas have three things in common. One, there's something the founders themselves want. Two, that they themselves can build. And three, that few others realize are worth doing. So now think about your own startup idea. How do you find out whether it has potential? Well, I would start with these three central questions. Does my idea solve a problem or create an opportunity? Who is my target market? And what value does my idea deliver to the target audience? Answering these questions objectively will unlock the potential to your dream, believe me. But objectivity is key here. You know, your assumptions going into this journey might be indeed wrong. You need to recognize that your opinion is actually irrelevant. You've got to learn to answer these three central questions with facts from the marketplace, not from your own impressions. Market research is essential for startups. Understanding the needs and wants of your target market will be the difference between success and failure. For too many startups, it can take years to find the right fit in a market. And it's often during this time that they fail to see real solid traction in the marketplace, that they start to run out of cash. It needs to get a quicker bolt of lightning than that. Remember, the number one reason for failure of the Inc. 500 is not enough capital. So you need to do market research to gather information to answer those three central questions objectively. And like it or not, that work has to be done up front to validate that your idea can actually find traction and eventually succeed. Now, market research, you might be yawning, but market research, it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, and these are the primary examples, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on a couple of them. But before you start any research, you have to decide what you're looking for. You need to discover what you have to have in order to gain more confidence in being successful. And one way to start that is to identify what your business idea is all about. And some people call it the business hypothesis. And this is the example of what preceded Apple's introduction of the iPod in 2001. People will pay to download music to listen to in public. Now, as you can see on the slide, embedded in that hypothesis were three key assumptions. B, the downloading assumption, was already validated by Napster, where millions of people, including myself, were downloading music for free. And that was beginning back in 1999. C, the listening in public assumption, was also validated by the Sony Walkman and later the Discman. That had been in existence since 1979. So the real question was around A for Apple. That assumption was, would folks pay to download music? And that's where Apple spent all of its time in market research. Well, you know what happened. So once you've initially decided what you want to learn about from the marketplace to test your business idea, it's time to get out of the building and start talking to people. And I mean it. Now you can start with family and friends. Some people say, no, don't bother with that. And I say, that's okay. You just need to recognize you can't stop there. So first, you need to interview 10 to 20 people to discover how they currently deal with what your startup idea hopes to remedy. So you sit down with these people and you ask, how are you solving this problem today? What is frustrating about how you solve it today? Where is solving this problem on your priority list? And if you solve this problem, how would things be better for you? So you want to learn whatever you can from these interviews. So you want to listen intently. And you have to avoid trying to sell them on anything about your idea. You're trying to find out about them, not about how your idea fits. But once you gather all that information, you review it, maybe you share some conclusions with a mentor to determine, what you've gathered. If your problem or discovery interviews give a clear indication that, you've got something here, that's when you start the solution interviews. And you have to be sure, again, to do 10 or 20 of those, but be sure you're adding people to that quest. And these interviews are different. That's where you begin by telling them what the problem is and then giving them your solution. And at this point, you're giving them a high level features of your solution and how it will work. You might say what it doesn't do, and you might even suggest pricing. But again, you're not trying to sell here. What you are trying to do is to gauge their willingness to buy. And here's where you might use a prototype or a minimum viable product in those interviews so that they can, touch and feel the product that you're trying to sell, or in this case, maybe show a video that would help them to see in a little more tangible fashion what you're trying to do. But these initial sets of interviews are a must, in my opinion. And too many entrepreneurs just avoid doing them altogether. Now, primary market research, it can be very expensive. And normally it's reserved for larger companies that are already in existence. But online surveys have become a great vehicle to collect marketplace feedback. Now, a survey tool platform is digital software that enables you to make and send a multitude of surveys out to the marketplace to get their reaction. Now, you're provided with templates of questionnaires, sample questions. Obviously, you can add your own. And then the platforms, they collect the data from all the respondents. They collect the answers. They provide report filter capabilities and data analysis like graphs and charts that help you understand the reactions you're getting. And most of these platforms provide what they call branching or skipping logic, which is setting up different questions in response to answers given so that if you answered no to this, then you jump to question 6, that kind of thing. Now, what you're seeing on this slide are 10 reputable survey tool platforms, most of which have a low cost or even free option for dipping your toe in the marketplace. You need to check these websites out, I'm telling you. Most of the platforms on that prior slide charge $25 a month or less for their basic service. I think the most expensive was $59 a month or so. So it's really very cost effective, and you don't have to do it for a whole year. You can do it for a month or two to gather the data that you want. But you get results in real time as people complete the surveys. And building the questions has a great deal of flexibility in it on these platforms. And the respondents can complete the survey in private, which in my judgment fosters more objectivity than the face-to-face interviews that you began with earlier. Now, if you have a ready-made list of people that you'd like to contact to be part of the survey, virtually all these platforms make it easy for you to download your distribution list to the platform to send out the request for filling out the survey. Now, if you don't have a ready-made list, some of these platforms provide direct links to a range of social media platforms so that you could use your own social media pages to post publicly what the questionnaire is to get people to respond to you. And also, some of the platforms will include a list to access panels, which you can use to source respondents if you don't have any of your own. Now, some of these market research panel, these are the ones that are in the US that are really pretty good. And a market research panel is a group of recruited respondents who have agreed to take part in market research. Now, they've usually shared a lot about themselves, and in some cases, an extensive amount of information about themselves, like where they went to school, how they make decisions. And the panelists are compensated in some way. They're paid or given some kind of reward. Now, I've highlighted with a red arrow AYTM. That stands for Ask Your Target Market. Now, AYTM is a survey tool and a research panel company. It manages over 60 million respondents or panelists across the globe. And they use 10 demographic criteria for each respondent, like age, ethnicity, education, but they also have about 2,000 what they call psychographics to help classify these respondents more acutely, like what are their lifestyles, what are their interests, the key decision-making criteria for things. Now, just for illustration, assume that you have a survey of 10 questions that you want circulated about your business. And let's say you want to get 400 completed surveys about your startup idea. So you've spent the time on the platform, you've built your survey, you've got 10 good questions. Now, to get 400 responses at AYTM randomly from all manner of respondents worldwide without any demographic choices, it'd cost you $700 to get 400 responses. That's about $1.75 each. It's not terribly expensive. Now, if you wanted to get 400 completed surveys from single women between 25 and 45 who work part-time and earn between 25 and 50 grand a year, that would still cost you only $700. But it would take a lot longer to get those responses because they have to cull through a lot more participants to get to the right people. Now, if you wanted to narrow the panel by 3 psychographics, like you want them to be a dog owner, you want them to play video games and be a Walmart shopper, now that cost goes up. That would be probably more like $4,900 to get the 400 surveys. But the point is, these companies are out there. They allow you to find out in the marketplace the things that you need to in order to move forward with confidence. And it's worth checking out these market research panel companies. And carefully listening to the marketplace can unfortunately throw a wrench into the works. That happens. but successful entrepreneurs are always prepared to pivot. You know what pivot means. It's fundamentally changing the direction of your business when you realize that your current product or services aren't really meeting the needs of the marketplace. Well, in 1891, Mr. William Wrigley moved from Philly to Chicago to go into business for himself, and he formed a business to sell scouring soap. And to enhance sales, which he was going door to door, he offered a small premium, which was baking powder, free baking powder as an incentive to buy his soap. But by 1892, he concluded that the baking powder was actually more popular than his soap. So he switched to selling the baking powder and giving a few sticks of gum as an incentive to buying his baking powder. And he soon found out that the chewing gum was more popular than the baking powder. So in 1893, William Wrigley introduced spearmint and juicy fruit gum, and he never looked back. And that's what I call a pivot, a Chicago pivot. Validating your idea with market research prevents achieving failure. There's nothing more wasteful than brilliantly engineering a product that doesn't sell. When you create something that nobody wants, does it really matter if you did it on time? If you did it on budget, with high quality and a beautiful design? No. Remember this one thing. People don't buy your product or service. They buy what your product or service can do for them. And that's why market research is critical. Now let's shift gears a minute. Let's assume that your research has identified a target market and that you've validated that there's likely to be some traction there. So what do? I like to start with marketing. And to me, marketing is answering those two key questions. What are the characteristics of my target customers and why do they buy? If you can begin to answer those two questions, you can therefore begin to determine what your market potential is for the business that you're trying to build. And there's certainly a lot of marketing programs out there, including some webinars at SCORE. But this is one example I'll give you. Now, an entrepreneur came to Chicago SCORE saying that he had started a business of selling proprietary handmade Cuban cigars to African Americans in the US. Now, the backstory here was pretty neat. His father had rolled cigars for some of the biggest Cuban cigar manufacturers ever. And so he had lots of contacts. As a kid, he met a lot of these people, so he knew them personally. So he had these great inroads into Cuba. And this was before Obama opened up Cuba to the US. So this was before that. So he initially came in and said, okay, my website is up and running. I've got an inventory of 300 boxes of handmade cigars. I bought a list of 8,000 names of affluent African Americans in the US. It cost me $3,500. And I said, well, that's a great start. Can I see your business plan? He said, no, I haven't written up a business plan. I said, okay. So initially he came in to get help to see if he had enough inventory, which was 300 boxes of cigars. So naturally I asked him, I said, well, how have your sales been so far? And he said, well, I haven't tried selling anything. I've been nervous. If I reach out to the names that I bought, those 8,000 names, I don't want to do it if I'm going to run out of inventory. That won't be very good in the marketplace. So I said, okay, let me do a little homework and I'll get back to you. So in the return session, after spending a little over an hour, a little less than an hour on Google, here's what I found. At that time, there were 30 million adult African Americans in the US, and 7.7% of them, according to CDC, smoked cigars. World Tobacco said that large cigars had a 49% market share and that machine versus handmade was a 50-50 split. And the Cigar Association of America said the average cigar consumption was 2 per week, or about 104 cigars a year. So we sat down and we went through the math to identify what's the possible size of this market for you. So if there's 30 million cigar smokers and 30 million African Americans and 7.7 smoke cigars, 50% are hand rolled, 49% are large, and they smoke an average of 104 a year. That's almost 60 million cigars a year. Now, if you were very, very conservative and said, okay, let's assume that over a period of several years, I can capture 1/2 of 1% of that market with an online business. That would mean you would sell almost 300,000 cigars in a year. And that equates to about 11,770 boxes, or $2.4 million in sales, with an average sale per cigar of about $8. So this fellow was excited because he's looking at what appears to be a very modest capture of market share that represents a $2.4 million business that might be his business evolved in 3 or 4 years. But I said, okay, you came to ask about your inventory. So you guys should know that a box of cigars typically has 25 in a box. So he had 300 boxes. So that's about 7,500 cigars that he had in inventory. So I said, let's go through the math. You've got 8,000 names, and hopefully 7.7 of them, 7.7% smoke cigars, 49 smoke large, 50 smoked hand rolled like you provide, and they on average will smoke 104 cigars a year. That's 15,700 cigars annually. Now, if 100% of those cigar smokers bought from you, you've got 6 months worth of inventory, right? I got over 15,000 cigars to sell and 7,500 in inventory. That covers about 6 months worth of time. But what's the catch there? That's if you capture 100% of the cigar smokers in that sample, which you'll never do. I'm saying if you're lucky to capture 0.5% after a couple of years. So I told him, you've got more than enough inventory. Get out there to start selling. That's an example of trying to identify what the market potential is for a new business. What you have to go through in order to capture the information. Now, granted, I'll allow you that this was a rather straightforward example. You've got African American cigar smokers, hand-rolled cigars. I get it. But you should be taking away here that the more specific you get about your target market relative to the product you're trying to sell, the easier it is for you to determine what the market potential is, because you can go out there and grab the information that's surrounding your market potential, surrounding your target market. You should be aiming like a rifle to start your business, not like a shotgun. You can always expand from where you begin to encompass a larger portion of the marketplace. But the more focused you are in the beginning, the better apt you are to identify what the characteristics are of your target market. And remember, in this example, we didn't even get to the question as to why do you buy? And that's the other part of marketing. Now let's talk a little bit about sales, because obviously once you get started, you're going to have to develop some revenue. And you should always be selling. You need to develop an elevator speech. That's a little presentation that you make that's less than 30 seconds, probably more like 25 seconds, that is all about you and your business, that tries to solicit some sort of reaction from someone. And you should always have that at your beck and call, because you want to go out there and you want to network with people. You know, you don't know that the person sitting next to you on the L is your first big customer or your next big supplier. You don't know the person you're standing on the escalator next to is maybe your next biggest partner or investor, or who you're sharing the elevator with is your biggest customer ever. 80% of success is just showing up. That's a quote from Hollywood about getting the part. You can't get the part if you don't audition, and you can't audition if you don't show up. Another key part of selling is to talk less and listen more. You know, if you go to any meaningful sales course, they will tell you that the prospect should be talking 75% of the time, and the salesperson should be talking 25%. Why? Because you want to know what's on their mind. You want to know why they buy. You want to know what their target characteristics are. And you can't find that out while you're talking. So you need to get out and network. You need to talk about your business. You need to have that concise elevator speech. And some people don't like selling. And some people need to give themselves permission to call on somebody, particularly if you're selling business to business. And what I mean by that is, you know, dropping off a pamphlet or dropping off a card or sending an email so that it gives you permission to call, because what are you doing? I'm just following up on the card I left. I'm just following up on the email I sent. You're giving yourself permission to call and taking away that reluctance to reach out in the marketplace. You need to start building your list of contacts and your potential customers like yesterday. And you need to start a blog and develop content for your business. Think about how you buy online today. What you're looking for are companies that are credible, that have reliable products, that have people that are knowledgeable about the business they're in. You want to feel confident when you make a purchase decision, and you certainly want to be confident when you're exploring the possibilities. And this is one great way of doing it, is developing content on your website. Now, you can pay someone to curate information for you. They can look at journals in your space. They can find articles in the business that you're in. They can take those, put them on your website, and give you an opportunity to comment on them. And you'll get reaction from people that go to your website, because you're giving them credibility, reliability, and knowledge about yourself, about your business, about your product. And you also have to have videos. My God, today over 70% of all online traffic is video. So if your website doesn't have video, if you're not on YouTube, frankly, you probably don't exist. Now, price is something we can spend a lot of time on it, but I believe it's the strongest signal as to value of your product or service, or the position in the marketplace. I think letting customer choose how much to pay is really key. And how you do that is oftentimes bundling things together so you create more value. The best example is long gone, but I'll give it to you. It's Sears. Sears in their hardware department, if you went to buy a screwdriver, for example, you had good, better, best. The good cost you $6, the better cost you $8, the best cost you $12. You decided what quality you wanted and how much you wanted to pay, and that's the screwdriver you bought. It was ingenious at the time. But you could bundle things together. So, give people a break. You buy a shirt and a pair of trousers, you can couple it with a belt for a discount price. So you provide the bundles that allow them to choose what they want to put together in order to suit their affordability index. And remember to base the price on value, not just cost. A great example is we had a client at SCORE here in Chicago that sold products to people that basically waterproofed crawl spaces in basements. And one of the products that was very common was vapor barriers that they would install along the walls of the crawl space or the basement. And those vapor barriers would preclude moisture from getting into that lower space. And virtually all of those vapor barriers were 8 feet wide. So if you were a contractor trying to, work on a basement or a crawl space, every 8 feet you had to seal a seam, and then that cost labor. And it was also the thing that failed the most, in which you had to go back and support your warranty as a basement contractor. Well, we were working with a party that had found a 12-foot wide vapor barrier. And what that meant to the contractor was that they had 50% fewer seams to seal, and therefore 50% fewer fail opportunities in the process. And so that made their profitability for that contract job higher because their total cost was less. And that allowed a premium to be paid for that 12-foot length versus the 8-foot. So it wasn't just a 50% higher cost, it was higher than that because you're basing it on value and not just on the cost. And as you're thinking about price, service businesses have to be careful. Normally a service business, you're pricing yourself at how many hours you're going to bill to someone. So how many hours in the year? Do the math, it's about 2,000. So if you want to earn $100,000 for 2,000 hours, you want to charge $50 an hour. Well, you're not going to be billing 2,000 hours a year. You're going to be doing other things. You're going to be working on business. You're going to be marketing. So maybe your billable hours are only 1,000 or 50% of your time. So in order to earn $100,000, you would set your target price for a billable hour at $100. Finding out about competition is a real central thing, but it does take digging. And you got to start by finding out what is your best industry indication code. And that's called a NAICS code, NAICS. And if you go to NAICS.com, they have over 1,100 industry codes. They're all 6 digits. And you can drill down to find what's the best fit for you and grab those keywords in the description of that business segment. And I think also NAICS publishes who are the top 10 companies in that industry segment. So you take those keywords and then you go to Google and you use those words to find out companies in that space. Another more specific way is to go to thomasnet.com and you can go to their pull down menu of industry groups, pick one, and you can actually ask for a geographical boundary and get a list of people that are in that business segment, in that geographical boundary. So that's a way for you to go about finding out, okay, who's out there as a competitor? The biggest problem I found is when I would talk to small businesses and ask them who their competition was, too often they said, well, I really don't have a lot of competition. And that really wasn't true, but they didn't know who their competition was. What I found is that privately held companies that were very successful, the CEOs made it part of their job to survey the competition on a regular basis. It was part of their job. They put it on their calendar. They would do the research. They would meet with these companies. They would talk to them as competitors and look at their websites and talk to their client bases and anything that they could find in order to discover what was going on and how they were reacting. Trade associations is another great source. You can go to the library and get a list of all the associations in America, or you can go to directoryofassociations.com. And believe me, there's somewhere between 24 and 37,000 trade associations in the US. And each of these are promoting their membership. And so on their websites, you can get a list of their members. You can get a list of who their officers are. That gives you at least a clue of who some rivals are in that process. But they also have things that are useful to the industry. They'll do studies. They'll put things on the website that might be useful for you. So between getting your business segment description and number, going to places like Google and Thomasnet, and going to trade associations, you should be able to come up with a justifiable list of people that do a lot of the similar things that you do. And that's when you start to do your research. You go to their website, you read their reviews, you find out what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. You look at those 1-star reviews and the 5-star reviews. The same things you do when you buy, that's what you should be doing when you're looking at the competition. And also ask your suppliers who your competitors are. Who else do you supply in the city? They may not tell you, but they may. And that's just more information that you can collect. But once you gather all of that information, it's important to put it in some sort of framework that's useful. And so if you go to score.org, go to the search bar and look for analyze your competition. And you will find that there's a free webinar called Analyze Your Competition, and you can register for that course. And what that course does is it's a workshop that walks you through how to profile all of that information. And they use what they call a SWOT analysis. So they identify what are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats. They put it in a framework that is easily addressed once you've gathered all this information on the competition. All right, let's change gears. Now we're gonna go into some important considerations for your business, like should you be a corporation or whatnot. You know, today 70% of the new businesses start as a sole proprietorship, and they do it because it's cheap and it's easy, and that may be fine. However, a sole proprietorship or a partnership as a business organization does not protect your personal assets from liability. So somebody could file suit against you and they could attach themselves to your home, your savings account, or anything if you're a sole proprietor or a partnership. And I don't think that's the right thing to do. I had someone come up in a workshop once and said, hey, I'm an event manager. I don't think I need to have a limited liability or a C corporation. And I just said, gee, I wonder who was that event manager at the Indiana State Fair in which the stage and equipment fell and killed a few people? And that person said, okay, I get your point. So I recommend forming a limited liability company or a C corporation as a way to insulate your personal assets from liability. That's something you have to do. Now, the nice thing about an LLC is that it's very easy to form. It's less costly than a corporation. It's easier to maintain in terms of paperwork. And the way in which you can have it taxed is basically unlimited. You could have it taxed as a sole proprietorship, a partnership, a C corporation, S corp, anything you want. So it's very, very flexible. Now, there's some things that are a little more restricted to it, but a nice other addition is that you could have a partner, in this case, a member of the LLC, that doesn't contribute money but contributes their time. So you could give a share of your business away if they're going to work on the cash register or do all of your accounting, as an example. You can't do that with a C corporation. C corporations are more formal. They cost more money to set up. The maintenance of the record keeping is a little more cumbersome. And certainly the tax on a C corporation is higher than your personal consumption. So what most private companies do is they elect what they call a subchapter S corporation. So they form a C corporation. With the IRS, their relationship is an S corporation, and the tax rate that they pay is not the corporate rate, it's their personal tax rate. The other benefit of the other detriment of a C corporation is not only do you have to pay taxes on the profits that you earn, but if you distribute a dividend to the owner, which would be you, then you, the owner, have to pay taxes on the dividend. So you're actually being taxed twice. And that's why an S corporation is usually a much more acceptable approach. The number one thing, though, is to protect your personal assets. But once you've set up your corporation in its formation, you're not done. You've still got other things to do. So you've got to complete all the forms to get your business set up in the state of Illinois. And that is usually done by filling out all sorts of forms and setting it up with the Secretary of State. So you go to them, you have forms to fill out, there's fees to be paid, but it's rather painless. And that gets done with the Secretary of State. Now, if you are a franchise, it has to be done with the Attorney General, but that's not really the point. But also, you have to determine whether or not you have to attain a business license for your business. Now, you think of a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. Yeah, those guys have to have licenses to operate. But in the state of Illinois, if you're an interior designer, an athletic trainer, a nail technician, you have to be licensed. So you've got to go and figure out what my licensing requirements are for your business. And so you go to the state, you figure that out. The city of Chicago has certain requirements for licenses as well. And so there's forms to fill out, there may be some tests you have to take, and there's usually a fee to be paid. By contrast, if you're trying to set up a business in Aurora, they don't have any licenses. It's just the way it is. But those are things that you have to sort out depending on the nature of your business. If you've got employees, you've got to worry about labor laws. You've got to worry about workman's comp and OSHA. With immigration laws, you have to worry about, the identifying the eligibility of every employee that you hire. Taxes, you've got to collect the employee's tax ID number. You've got to collect their Social Security and tax withholding and make those payments. All of those things have to be done. And if your business has a label on your product that has a barcode, you have to get that approved and licensed through somebody. So what I've done is put together this short list of most of the websites that you'll have to go to, including that barcode number at the bottom, gs1us.org. And these are the websites you go through to determine, do I need to be licensed? What are the rules I have to follow? How do I get set up correctly? And you're probably going to be in need of some legal assistance. And so here's a great way to get that legal advice for starting your business. You can get free or reduced legal support for starting your business from the law schools here in Chicago. So these are the names of, Chicago, Kent, Northwestern, Loyola, University of Chicago, and DePaul. You can go to these clinics in which they have second or third year law students that are being supervised by actual corporate lawyers or by legal professors. And you can go to them and ask for assistance in starting your business. What forms do I have to fill out? What are the things I need to do? What I need to worry about? All that sort of stuff. You can also go to Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and that website will list actual corporate lawyers who are providing pro bono or free services for startup businesses. Now recognize that this is for startup. They cannot become your ongoing attorneys. They can only help you start your business. But at least it's a place that you can go to get some assistance to start up. Every business owner needs people surrounding them. You need a banker, a lawyer, an accountant, an insurance agent, and a mentor. And what you really need to focus on is establishing a relationship with each of these potential partners who have experience in the space in which you're playing. The fact that you have a friend who's really good accountant is not helpful if they don't understand the risks associated with online marketing. And so when you go to establish your bank account at a bank, which you'll have to have a separate account from your personal bank, you want to ask that banker, probably a community banker, do you do business with companies in my space? And you tell them what your space is. And if they have some, that's great, because at some point in time, you might talk with a commercial lender who might be in business supporting those companies, and therefore they understand your issues. It's kind of like dating too. You want to find somebody that understands your space, but you also want to have somebody that has good chemistry with you. And those two things are really critical for the partnerships you have to forge. Now, one of the things that you're going to get as a participant in this webinar is what we call a business startup process map at SCORE Chicago. It was developed by a volunteer here in Chicago, and it's a great reference point. It's a 5-page chart that shows all the steps that you could possibly think of. Now, recognize some of these aren't going to apply to you, and that's fine. But many of them will, and it's a great checklist. And so when you get this, I advise you to, get yourself a beer or a glass of wine and sit down and walk through it and begin to understand all the different steps that you should be thinking about, determining whether or not it applies to you or not. It'll appear daunting, but believe me, it's going to be a great help to you. And when you get home tonight, you should be thinking about these 4 areas to subscribe. Now, Entrepreneur Magazine and Inc. Magazine, that's a paid subscription, but you can go to their websites and see all sorts of articles as well. The Startup Magazine and Startup Digest, those are free. And you can go to their curators and get weekly emails sent to your email about things that are going on in the startup community. These are great websites, and you should get signed up for those right away. Now, there's also platforms that assist startups, and I'll go through some of these to give you an idea of what they're like, because this is really a place where you can get some great assistance to launch your business. So most people think of Amazon for e-commerce, and it can be great, but it can also be troublesome. Shopify is the biggest online shop builder. They've got 100,000 businesses, and they also have lots of bells and whistles to help you out. Now, it's not free, but it's a great place to go. Now, if you want to build your own store from scratch, Squarespace may be a great option. They've got lots of templates that leave the impression that you're very creative. They also have payment and shipping options that are built in. They just don't have an inventory management component. WooCommerce, very beginner friendly and has a large market share today, believe it or not. There's nothing complex about it, and it has a lot of built-in third-party payment options. The best thing, they've also got a free version. Wix is known as a site builder, but it also has an e-commerce option, which really is built for non-techies. And it's really got feature-rich components to it. And you should explore looking at Wix. And Doric is a new player. They've got an impressive list of templates for e-commerce, although they're limited in number, but they really work pretty well based on the reviews. Now, if you're looking at shipping and fulfillment, that component, if you're looking to perform that order fulfillment in-house, then ShipStation and Shipping Easy are two great options. They're both based in Austin, Texas, by the way. But if you want to provide your own fulfillment yourself in your own operation, you can outsource it to a third party as an option, or you could do it yourself and then use ShipHero, ShipBob, or Saltbox as ways to enhance it. So ShipBob, they've got the largest network, so they've got inventory locations out there that you can use. They have overseas locations, but they're very much hands-off. So they really provide a lot of flexibility, but their fees run kind of high. So if you don't want to pay the high fees, ShipHero might be a little better. They too offer outsourcing if you wanted it, but they also offer an ability for you to rent space and capability to do your own fulfillment in their space. They've got a high minimum order requirement though. Saltbox is relatively new, founded in 2019. They're built to keep the business owner in control. So you do Saltbox, it's very affordable, but you've got to be very involved for it to work. And finally, here's some payment and infrastructure platforms. Stripe, I think, is a much better platform than PayPal because you don't see Stripe on your website like you see PayPal. They give the impression to the buyer that you've got a direct relationship with Visa, for example. So you sound like a much more credible business. Of course, Score is where you've got a payment structure you can put on your phone to do a plug-in charge. And then these last four are platforms that allow you to build your own company infrastructure. So you've got Slack, which is basically messaging and shared files. Manage Hub, which is a network of operating procedures you can have your employees write and store. Gusto is HR and payroll. And HubSpot is really great at managing all your marketing inbound from multiple social platforms. It costs some money. The point of all of this is there's lots of platforms out there that will help accelerate your business cycle and your success quotient. And it really is in your best interest to search them out. I also wanted to give you a list of websites that you should go to learn more about what you're facing as a startup. Of course, Score Chicago is great. The SBA is great, but Gust is a good source. Startups.com, Startup Nations, Startup Professional Musings are startup professionals that are just writing about their experiences and sharing them with others. It's a great place. And All Business is another great platform to go to find out more about the things that you're going to likely encounter and how other people have dealt with that. Now, once you get started, there's also incubators and accelerators here in the city. And this is a list of the more prominent ones that you might consider trying to network into and get affiliated with. So once you've launched, a way to get to the next level is to get an accelerator. So these are at the bottom of the slide, those are accelerators which will take you to the next level. So usually you get a little bit of seed capital. This is where you get together with other of entrepreneurs in a class they call a cohort. You graduate together in like 3 or 4 months. They give you all sorts of assistance and help. They bring in other people to coach you on how to get things done and launch to the next level. That's an accelerator. If you haven't launched yet, but you want some assistance in doing that, incubators are what you look for there. And here is where, again, you converge on a shared space. You're working with a lot of similar entrepreneurs in the same kind of difficulty you are in trying to get off the ground. But there's no time frame associated with it. On average, these incubators, people last anywhere from 3 to 4 years. The average is actually about 33 months. But you're working together with 10 or 20 other entrepreneurs, and the organizations, again, are providing you with some expertise. They're bringing in outside people to talk with you about the situations you face. And incubators are a great way to launch your business, but also you have to get approved by them. So you need to network in, and that's where LinkedIn is a great resource. You should join LinkedIn, and then you should find out if you're in the healthcare business, for example, you want to network into HealthBox, that's the way to go. Find out who their principals are. Find out what businesses they're supporting that they launched, and then try to befriend those people and make your pitch to them to get a member of their infrastructure to introduce you to the principals. That's the best way to go here. Well, at this point, it's probably time to think about wrapping up. I'd like to end with this quote. Sometimes life is going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. Now, this quote was from a guy that a lot of people call a genius, a visionary. Some people call him a taskmaster. He's been compared to Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Walt Disney. He was one of the most successful entrepreneurs ever, and he really knows this journey, and that's his advice. It's Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. Now, there's no doubt that the pandemic poured fuel on the fire of the famous entrepreneurial spirit in America. The Census Bureau reported that a whopping 3.1 million new business applications were filed through July of last year. Those new ventures, that was ahead of every other year recently other than 2013. And actually, new startups in 2021 were 35% higher than pre-pandemic 2019. Now, this chart might be a little clearer. You can see how pronounced that growth in new business applications were right after the pandemic was announced. But you can also see that the level that has been sustained since then in that gray area is well above what the past has been before the pandemic. So today's entrepreneurial stage remains very robust in the United States. Your time is now to join in. Remember, we were supposed to learn a little bit more about how to start your business. And I told you we'd cover a lot of material, a mile wide and an inch deep, and I hope we accomplished that today. I appreciate your listening in. If nothing else, I hope I made you think. Now, remember, you'll each get a copy of the slide deck and the process map afterwards, and I plan to stay and answer questions. Thanks a lot for listening in.
Okay, it looks like we have some questions. I'm trying to go all the way back to the top. If I already have an LLC, do I still need a business license?
You could. You have to take a look. If you're in Chicago, you need to take a look at the Chicago website. I think BACP can help with that. And certainly you need to look at the Illinois website to see if you need a license.
Do you have to set up a corporation in order to have an S corp, or can I just set up an S corp alone?
No, you have to have a corporation to take the S corporation option with the IRS.
Are there license requirements for a 501c3?
You know, I don't know that much about not-for-profits. So you'll have to maybe talk with somebody at SCORE or BACP for that.
Let's see. That's everything in the Q&A. Let me go in the Q&A box. A copy of today's presentation will be available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. I have a question regarding startups. That's what she said. Would you recommend doing events for the aldermen?
Well, if you're looking to do business with the city of Chicago, that can't hurt.
In order to receive credit for webinars that you attend, you must sign up for our Entrepreneur Certificate Program. Please visit chicago.gov/BACP certificate. Credit is not given for past attendance for webinars. Who should I go to get guidance to define a business plan for international real estate?
Well, I would actually start with somebody from SCORE Chicago. You have your first meeting with a mentor and you tell them what you're looking for, and they can search the other members of SCORE Chicago and actually look across all of SCORE nationally to see who are the right resources to help with international real estate.
Great answer, Jeff.
Any tips for someone interested in opening a brick and mortar retail store?
Yeah, my first tip is to be sure that you understand the character, back to marketing again, understanding the characteristics of your target market very specifically. And in this case, you've got a geographical a boundary, but you also need to know, why do those people that you're targeting, why do they buy the services or products that you're offering? You need to get clarity on that before you begin to explore getting laden with a physical location.
The SCORE Chicago help in the spa industry. I am a 10-year massage therapist who doesn't want to work for anyone anymore. I just got my LLC and EIN number.
And I'm still on the phone, Jeff, so I will take this one. And what I'm going to say is that we've got people in a variety of industries. Speaking to the spa industry specifically, I couldn't answer, but I can tell you that, as Jeff mentioned, we've got volunteers nationwide, 10,000 plus. So if in our area, in the Chicago area, we don't have somebody with that specific background, and your question is specific to the spa industry, throughout that 10,000 person roster, I'm sure we'll have somebody that will be able to answer your question. But my recommendation is have that first conversation, because sometimes it doesn't require that specific industry expertise, but rather business expertise, because it may be that you just need to find out the fundamentals, and we are all here to help you.
Thanks, Toya.
You're welcome.
Any advice for opening a lounge in Chicago?
A lounge, I'm assuming you're talking about a drinking establishment. Um, I don't have any specific advice other than going back to the fundamentals. Again, understanding where are you drawing people? So what are the characteristics of your target market? Why do they buy from a particular lounge? And you also need to understand your competition. And if you're really spending your time on those two subjects, you should gain a great deal of insight as to when and where you should be actually trying to launch something like a lounge.
If starting a mobile video production company, can I use my home as the business address?
Sure.
Is it possible to get multiple DBAs under a proprietorship? If so, how do you feel about that?
Well, you should know how I feel about a sole proprietorship in the first place. I don't think it's a useful or a protected organizational structure. However, uh, I think having multiple brand names is always confusing to the marketplace. So if you've got multiple DBAs under a sole proprietorship, I think it's less useful than you may think. And I would advise against it, frankly.
So far, it looks like that was the last question. I'm just going back through and make sure we didn't miss anything.
Are there other things in the chat box?
Let me check. No new questions came in. Hold on, wait a minute. What time is it? Okay, yeah, Mike. Yep. The website for signing up for a certificate is chicago.gov/BACP certificate. You must complete 6 classes in order to receive a certificate. Does general liability insurance only cover you if you have a brick and mortar location? Can it cover you if you travel to another customer or their location?
Well, you can get coverage for when you travel, but it's not going to be the same. I mean, you've got your physical and liability coverage for your space, and then for employees and for owner or whatever, you have your liability coverage as well. So it might be a different policy, but you should be able to get it from the same carrier.
Any advice from a business for a business consulting firm? Do I need insurance or a license?
Well, I'm not 100% sure about the license. There again, you need to check with the city of Chicago, if that's where you are, and the state of Illinois. But starting a consultancy, in my mind, you should have a business set up. And like I said before, an LLC or a C corporation would be a fitting structure. And the fact that you don't have maybe a lot of employees or a lot of business assets perhaps might suggest another structure. But in my mind, I just can't justify not having a business structure for a business.
A copy of this webinar will be available on youtube.com/Chicago BACP. To clarify, do you have to dissolve the company and then classify the business as something else?
Would you read that again?
To clarify, do you have to dissolve the company and then classify the business as something else?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what the predicate of that question is, but if you're talking about changing the structure, the answer is yes. You have to dismantle what you did set up in the first place. So if you have a partnership, for example, you have to dissolve the partnership before you can reclassify yourself as an LLC or a C Corp. That answers your question.
If you are a sole proprietorship, how can you get out of it?
How can you get out of it? You can, that's where you can, you could go to any of the legal websites and ask that question, and they'll give you an answer. I think all you have to do is to get in touch. In this case, it'd probably be the county, because that's where you file, I think, a sole proprietorship, and you fill out some paperwork to discontinue the sole proprietorship.
How does SCORE mentorship normally work?
Well, there's a process to become a client of SCORE. What you do is you go to score.org and you request a mentor. You can either choose your own mentor by looking at the roster of mentors and their skill sets, or you can be assigned a mentor. Once you are assigned and you and your mentor connect, then you determine how often you want to meet and go from there. So it's very subjective. It's based on what your needs are and based on the time frame that you and your mentor agree to work together. Our tagline is for the life of your business. So you can ask one question and that's it, or you can set yourself up with your mentor to have ongoing meetings as long as it works for you. But again, it's very client centric. So it's based on what your needs are and what you and your mentor agree to.
I think we just got another question in the Q&A box. Any advice on how to write online surveys and how to select the respondents?
Well, all I can say about the surveys is you start by first addressing what is it you want to learn? What are the answers that you're hoping to get from someone? And then you can actually go to the platforms and they will show you templates of questions that are related to that in some way, shape, or form. And then you can begin to modify as you see fit. But you have to first say, what is it I'm trying to learn? And be very, very specific about that. And then you'll be able to basically use the templates or your own wisdom to craft a question to get at those answers. And then again, just do some homework and look at some of those platform companies. They each have a little different wrinkle, but they're a great place to start and interact with and see whether or not it works for you.
Okay, I think that is it for today. Thank you, Jeff, for today's presentation. If Toy, do you have any last words, or Jeff?
My final comment would be thank you, everyone, for joining us and asking such great questions and for your interest in working with a SCORE mentor. So again, for those who do have an interest either in getting a mentor or being a volunteer, go to score.org and you can click on the tab to request a mentor or to volunteer with the organization. And thanks again, Jeff. This is, as usual, a lot of great information in tiny bites that I think we can all absorb.
Well, some of them were gulps, but my only comment is good luck to all of you out there. There's some great webinars to help you with your journey, and this is a great place and a great time to be, and best of luck to you.
Thank you to Toy and Jeff. This webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. Again, that's youtube.com/Chicago BACP. To learn more about our upcoming webinars, please visit chicago.gov/BACP webinars. Again, that's chicago.gov/BACP webinars. To sign up for our certificate program, that website is chicago.gov/BACP certificate, chicago.gov/BACP certificate. Thank you for attending and have a great day.